the Bain Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, man breaks teeth biting into pizza, which lights up, levitates, spins madly about, and flies away at inertialess acceleration. Man orders another, without mushrooms this time. E-arcs of greatness and spots of gore, plus we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Bain Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Bain Senior Editor Tony Daniel. Hey, we would be extremely grateful if you would take a bit of time and go over to iTunes or wherever you get the podcast and give the Bain Free Radio Hour a 5-star rating. And please email us with any questions or comments at podcast@bain.com. Thank you very much. Just want to remind you that we're doing the podcast in both video and audio version now. The video version is available at iTunes and also on the podcast webpage. And also there is a Bain YouTube channel where all the podcasts have been archived, so you can check that out as well. This time we have part 2 of a 2-part interview with Tom Kratman, who discusses his new novel in the Carrera series, Days of Burning, Days of Wrath. This is a culminating volume in this long-running series, which brings to the climax the invasion of Carrera's Balboa on the planet Terra Nova by the venal and corrupt Taran Union and its allies, including Earth Peace Fleet Admiral Wallenstein. It's a great read, and Tom Kratman will give us the scoop on the novel. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. Hey, take advantage of this while it lasts. For the rest of August, get discounts on all Larry Correia's Monster Hunter International Series ebooks. Save over 28% on Monster Hunter Siege and Monster Hunter Guardian, the 2 newest books in the series. That's a savings of $2 per ebook. Plus, all the other Monster Hunter ebooks in the Monster Hunter International series are at $1 off, all of them. These discounts will be available wherever Bain ebooks are distributed, but the sale ends at the stroke of midnight before September 1st, so stock up while the getting's good. Hey, the August E-arcs have boldly burst forth from the forges of creation. Now, an E-arc is the path a Perseid meteor that's going to make Earthfall takes towards someone's house who has spilled the salt and failed to throw a pinch over his left shoulder, opened an umbrella in his living room and crossed the path of a black cat, and worst of all, put a hat on a bed and left it there. No, wait. That's not what an E-arc is at all. An E-arc is an electronic advanced reading copy of a book. We put these out 3 or 4 months before a book is coming out in print and in ebook form, for those who can't wait to get the next book in a series or try out a great Bain author. These are the electronic versions of the galleys that we send to authors. So they may have a few typos, but hey, they are the most absolute piping hot version in which you can read a Bain book. So first for August in E-arc form is 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon. Battle for the New World. It's 1637 in the Caribbean. Uptimer from 20th century America, Commander Eddie Cantrell and his ally and friend, Admiral Martin Tromp, start the year with some nasty surprises for Spain, whose centuries-long exploitation and rapine of the New World has run unchecked. But Imperial Spain is determined to possess the new black gold of the Americas in the form of crude oil pouring out of the Allies' pumps on Trinidad. Now the battle for the New World has begun, and it's a fight to the finish. Also in E-arc format is Serpent Daughter by D.J. Butler. Long live the Queen of Cahokia. Sarah Calhoun has taken her father's throne and ascended into her goddess's presence in unfallen Eden, as her father never did. That's Cahokia. But the queen may be dying. Forces are allied against her from without as well as from within. To survive, Sarah must enact an ancient rite that will propel her beyond mortality and lend her strength to fight. The queen may be dying, true, but if she is, she will go down fighting for the only thing that matters. Finally out in New York is Agent of the Imperium by Mark Miller, an epic novel set in the Traveler game universe. Jonathan Bland is a decider. In the services of the Empire, he has killed more people than anyone in the history of humanity, but to save 100 times as many. He died centuries ago, but the Imperium reactivates his recorded personality whenever a new threat appears. We follow Bland through places of legendary glory and massive conflict. For him, it is the battle for personal meaning in a life engineered for perpetual war and conflict, an epic novel in the Traveler universe. Agent of the Imperium Earc by Mark Miller, Serpent Daughter Earc by D.J. Butler, and the Earc of 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon are available exclusively at Baen.com, so check them out. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Tom Kratman. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. I want to welcome Tom Kratman back to the podcast. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Tony.
Give you a little background. Tom Kratman grew up in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, reading military history. He joined the Army and stayed a regular Army infantryman most of his life, his adult life, returning, although we don't know that for sure. You could, and you went back to college. Did you enlist and then go back to college? Is that how it worked? Or
My high school was kind of a strange place. I understand it's decayed quite a bit, but at the time, Boston Latin was about 12th in the country, to include the high-end schools like Groton and Grafton and the two Phillips. And it was a public school, but it was a test-in school. You had to test in. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, that year my scores were the highest, so I'm told. And it was just a bitch. You know, I mean, we usually had at least one teen suicide in any given year. The workload was immense. Summer vacations didn't exist. For summer vacation, you got a huge reading list to get done before you got back to school. 635 years old at the time. It's about 385 years old now. Yeah, 385, I think. And at the end of my junior year, I was just sick of it. I didn't want to do that shit anymore, so I enlisted in the Army. And spent 4 years in, got a couple of years of college knocked off while I was in. And then the Army gave me a scholarship, sent me back to Boston College, and I took ROTC and got commissioned a couple of years later.
And you were in as an officer for many years, and then you retired a lieutenant colonel, I guess. Was
Right.
that the regular stint before you became a lawyer, or?
No, after the first Gulf War, I just didn't see a lot of future in violently and militantly aggressive anti-communism anymore. You know, they were over pretty much.
The so-called end of history.
Yeah, well, it didn't quite work out that way, of course,
Yeah.
but since I've been back a couple of times since then. So I got out and went to law school. And then I practiced law for a while, really hated it. The study, someone much more famous man than I, and I don't remember his name, once said that the study of law was sublime, but the practice is sordid. And that's pretty much correct. I kind of enjoyed the study of it, kind of, even if I didn't really like law school. But practicing it was kind of miserable. Some people like it, the poor soulless bastards, but I didn't.
Well, we won't go into all that you did, but you did a whole lot of stuff. You went back in and were a lawyer as well in the Army, right?
Not exactly. My terminal tour was at the War College, and I had a law degree by then, and I was sort of in-house counsel to the Peacekeeping Institute, which was not perhaps the best possible match. But no, for the Army, I was an infantryman, almost entirely.
Well, after all of this, you started writing. You probably wrote before, but our first book at Bain was A State of Disobedience, Caliphate, and the series consisting of A Desert Called Peace, Carnifex, The Lotus Eaters, The Amazon Legion, Come and Take Them, The Rods and the Axe, Pillar of Fire by Night, and this is the Carrera series and the anthology Terra Nova, which is out in mass market, yeah. And or is it coming out?
I believe it is out about 2 months ago, maybe.
Yeah, actually, yes, we would have brought it out before Pillar of Fire. In fact, it's sitting up there on my mass market shelf. You wrote some novels with John Ringo and found that you didn't really like to co-author that much, as I recall. Watch on the Rhine, Yellow Eyes, and the Telluriad.
They're not really co-authored at all. You can ask. John said it in public several times. It was supposed to be Tom Kratman writing in John Ringo's puzzling universe, but Jim Bain, for marketing reasons, didn't do it that way, and he didn't tell either of us either. So yeah, they're not written to an outline. It's just John letting me play in his universe.
Yeah, well, that's cool. I mean, that's a time-honored publishing sharecropping co-authoring move that Jim Bain did.
Yeah. In fact, putting an anthology together was an experiment on my part to see if I could work with other people in an other than military. And I wasn't really great about it necessarily in a military environment, but in a civilian environment, I had my doubts. It worked out reasonably well, and we'll probably get into what I'm doing with that recently discovered ability.
Yeah, by which you mean Terra Nova, which was the first of these anthologies that are set in your world, the Carrera universe. You also have that 3-book military adventure series called the Countdown series, which are really great books, and they're all still for sale, of course. Yeah, now at books. Go ahead.
Nobody knew where to stack them at Barnes and Noble. I went into probably a dozen different Barnes and Nobles, and I found them under science fiction because of Bain, under general fiction. They were anywhere because they didn't fit, I guess, what the minions and Barnes and Noble really understood.
Yeah. So, well, it's hard to make a decision when you're doing the BISAC classification system, because you want your readers, who mostly think of you now as a science fiction reader, to be able to find these books. At the same time, the readers who would be reading them in general fiction should also be able to find them. So it may not be the kids' fault that stock the shelves more than just trying to figure out how to classify things. It's crazy. Yeah, book selling. It's getting crazier.
I didn't leave a trail of bodies behind me when I looked. I just thought it was kind of odd and funny.
Well, I don't know. But now there is science fiction out from you. Now at booksellers everywhere is this great book, which is Days of Burning, Days of Wrath by Tom Kratman. And this is a big culminating book in the plot culminating book in the Carrera series. Yeah. So, all right. So, we've been playing around and hinting at the fact that there are a lot of Earth analogies in the geography, and how much of this is because I know I'll say, well, this is the analog of this and that, and then you'll pull the rug out from under me if I go too far in that direction. You'll say, no, actually. So how are we supposed to take this? You're not really writing satire or an alternate future disguised here. This is science fiction. At the same time, there's a lot of analogies to Earth.
Well, it's a roman clef. There's about 7 or 8 different ways to read the series. Okay, one of them is straight science fiction. Another one is a roman clef, where when the Secretary of Defense of the Federated States is named Ron Campos, which translates, interestingly enough, as Rumsfeld.
Yeah.
Um,
And you'd spent a lot of time in Panama.
yeah, I just spent about,
And
well,
married a Panamanian.
yeah, beautiful Panamanian, actually.
Yeah.
No, you've met her.
Mm-hmm. Very much a beautiful Panamanian, yes.
Yeah, that, you can read it as a Romana Clef. You can read them as a series of how-to essays. For someone who, one of my major ambitions in writing it was to make it a one-stop shop when the series was done in Art of War. If somebody wants to read about war, they can go there, and they'll get a fairly decent education in it. You know, ranging from how to organize. Remember the essay I did on that.
Yeah, we have. What is it? Principles of Organization.
Principles of Organization for War and Organizing for War in the Carrera-verse, I think.
Which is available as an ebook at Bain eBooks. So.
Yes. You know, Amazon Legion, how to use women, how to turn women into combatants, which is to say, don't do anything the United States or anybody in the West is doing, because it's not going to work.
I've always thought you had a great idea there, but that seems to be the best way to anyway, but let's not go off on
it's the only way. I think it could be done my way and no other. Yeah, maybe I'm a little arrogant about that, but my way and no other. You know, how to use artillery. There's a lot of how to use artillery in it. I'm not an artilleryman, but I spent a lot of time in mortars too, which is similar in principle. You know, there's a lot on training in there. There's a lot on administration, you know, how to set up an award system. There's a lot on how to organize and develop a leadership corps. Tactics, you know, everybody's got tactics. There's a fair amount of that in there. But, you know, again, heavy on the training and selection, which is part of training. And I did an essay on that for it too.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I like about the book so much is that, I mean, you get all this, you know, running around doing stuff in a lot of military fiction, science fiction. You really portray what bombardment and just the grind of the whole thing is in a way that's really effective, I think.
It's historically accurate. During the German offensives in the late part of the Great War, in like 1918, under Georg Bruckmüller, Russian bombardments on the Eastern Front in World War II, and carpet bombings by us and the Brits in the West, you can reasonably expect about 2% of the soldiers under bombardment to blow their own brains out. You know, I mean, it's a consistent enough pattern that, yeah, if you give them that kind of bombardment, 2% of them will kill themselves, and the rest are going to be catatonic nervous wrecks.
Well, Carrera does that to a surrounded, is it a Taran unit that
the one in the beginning, the 57th Anglian?
Yes, I think, yeah.
Die Hard 57th?
Where they basically, he goes in and says, well, you guys want to surrender? And they say, please, or something like that.
No, they don't. They don't want to surrender. They do not want to surrender. And the reason why is their commander, who's dead, had brought their actual colors, which go back 500 years. And they'd rather die than give up those colors to an enemy. And Carrera said, we're not going to take your colors. No, we don't do that. It's not our way. You know, demeaning you demeans us. No. You'll march out with a bullet in each cheek with your flags flying and your bayonets fixed. And then you turn in the rifles and you go to a prison camp. But we're not going to shame you.
Right. Yeah. It was, but they were at their wits' end.
Yeah, they were. Even the sergeant major was twitching from the bombardment. You know?
Yeah. Well, that was cool. How did the Zong get pulled in, and how's Carrera sort of messing with them?
Well,
their Navy had a blow.
Most of that was in the rods and the axe, I think.
Yeah.
And come and take them before that. Basically, they got pulled in. They had one of their aircraft carriers trying to evacuate their civilians from Balboa when the Torran Union was first attacking. And one of Carrera's submarines spotted it, which wasn't a very hard thing to do. And not knowing that it was engaged in because it was out of commo, the submarine skipper torpedoed it and killed, we don't know how many thousands of Zhang civilians. And that set things up for the Zhang to go into the war. Wallenstein, that's how she gets hooked up with the Empress, is trying to find an ally for the Torran Union, which is kind of limp-wristed, if you don't mind the analogy. Kind of weak in some ways. They're more muscular than the EU on Earth is, though. They've got more troops than Earth does, than the European Union does, and they're more willing to use them, but they're still kind of weak. And Carrera also wants them to come in because he doesn't want the TU to break off the war. He has to fight his war and have it done within a certain amount of time because he's got a citizen soldier, a relatively well-trained and unusually well-led citizen soldier militia army. He can't keep them mobilized indefinitely. He needs the war to be fought and won or lost, whichever, before he runs out of money and supplies. So he wants the Torran Union to go in, to come in. And so he arranges for his stealthy subs to knock off a couple of Zhang subs, as I recall. And that's provocation to stop any possibility of the Zhang not coming in the war. One of them is named not for the Empress, but for a previous Chinese Empress that this Empress took a great personal interest in. So that's how the Zhang are forced into war, even though it's not all that much in their interest.
So a lot of this is Wallenstein trying to stir the pot and to basically keep somebody like Carrera from taking the fight back and before she's ready to make her move on Earth. There's good guys in a way on the Torran Union side, like Claudio, what's his name?
Marciano. Yeah, he's a real person. That's not his name, but he's a real person. He's an old friend of mine, former Alpini general. I'm not going to say what he's doing now, even though I know what it is. And one of a relatively handful of generals that I actually think well of. Good soldier, good officer. Stefano de Calea is another, by the way. And indeed, in real life, they had a very similar relationship to the one in the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, but these guys they realize that they're perhaps not fighting for the good guys, but they have honor and they're going to fight, and they're good opponents for Carrera because otherwise he's a little too he's too good of a soldier for some of these idiots on the other side, and they give him a fight.
Oh yeah, particularly in Santa Josefina. Marciano, I mentioned it in the book actually in a letter Carrera sent that history is not going to be kind to him, and it's totally unfair because he did as good a job in Santa Josefina, given what he had to work with, as anyone could be expected to.
That's the neighboring country to Balboa, right? And why is it in the war, and what's its relationship to?
They started off really being an excuse. The Torran Union insists that Carrera and Balboa disarm because of the threat they pose to totally demilitarize Santa Josefina. Carrera is, of course, not going to do that. And he says something that's absolutely, in defense against disarming, he says something that's absolutely bullshit, which is that he doesn't have the logistic wherewithal to invade Santa Josefina, so there's no threat. Yes, he does. He absolutely has the wherewithal to do it. And in fact, he does do it in a different way. So they're going to use Santa Josefina as a base for the war against Balboa, Carrera's country. And to secure that base, they send in some troops. But it's just enough to give Carrera an excuse and not enough to actually defend the country. He's got his legions are full of Santa Josefinans who have crossed the border and enlisted. Enough for him to make 2 pure regiments of Santa Josefinans to send across the border to operate as guerrillas. And part of my objective there was to really to crap upon various pro-guerrilla and pro-terrorist Westerners, because he manufactures that war out of whole cloth. There doesn't really have to be a war. Even if it's a base, it's not a very effective base against him. But he wants to run them out of it anyway. Eventually he wants, it's not obvious, but eventually he knows he's going to lose enough people that he needs Santa Josefina as an ally and maybe to have an Anschluss with Balboa to increase its population to the, for self-defense in the future. And the fortunes of war sort of wax and wane with how much support Marciano gets, how many troops are sent to him. Like he gets a package, I think, of 6 battalions of gendarmerie, which are gendarmerie are great to use for counterinsurgency, and he uses them, but then they get pulled out again. So he's advancing the 2 regiments, 2 tercios of Santa Josefinans out working for Carrera come in. He's retreating. He gets some reinforcements. He's able to advance again. They get pulled out. He has to retreat again. And the whole time that he's having to concentrate on the regular Santa Josefinan regiments, a guerrilla movement is rising in his rear. And he can't, it's a problem we had in Vietnam really, is it's very hard to fight a conventional war on the perimeter and a guerrilla war in the interior. It's not like the Brits in Malaya who just had a guerrilla problem. In Vietnam, we had a guerrilla and a conventional problem. And that's a good deal of why we lost. It was just too hard.
So I guess I could ask you further what you mean about crap on the guerrilla theorist and such.
Oh, well, you've got someone who's pretty right-wing. He's not actually a fascist, but he does manipulate emotions to some extent like a fascist. And he has a propaganda ministry to do it for him. You've got someone like Carrera doing exactly the kinds of things that left-wing guerrillas have been doing for 70 years now. 72 years now. No, I'm sorry, Greece. 74 years now, right? He's doing exactly what they're doing, but he's not a lefty. So if you approve of what the lefties are doing, but you don't approve of what he is doing, then you have no principle. It's all tactical for you. He's demonstrating in the war in Santa Josefina that there's no principle to the left supporting guerrilla movements around the world the last 3 generations.
I see. So all right. So bringing it down a little bit from that broader perspective, we can't really talk about Hamilcars. There is a really fun subthread in the book that I enjoyed, which was this run across the war zone by Khalid, or the aftermath zone, and Alex Spiedel, who is
she's based on a real person too.
Who is she again? She's
a legislator. She's a lesbian. Or, well, as it turns out, she's not doctrinaire about it, but she's largely a lesbian. She's right-wing. She's hated.
Who is she? Is she Taran Union, or who does she work
She's
for?
Taran Union. She's a legislator in Saxon, a country in the Taran Union.
Okay.
And Khalid goes to investigate after the Muslim rebellion and the TU breaks out.
Yeah, Khalid works for Carrera, ultimately. He works for Carrera's spy master, right?
Yeah, he works for Fernandez. Khalid's a Druze. The Druze are an odd folk, and they're pretty noble, really. They're loyal to their homeland. So patriotism is a Druze value, wherever they live. And I wonder what happens when if an Israeli Druze battalion, and there was one, ever goes up against Syrian Druze. You know, probably each fights as well as they can. But in any case, in Israel, for example, the Druze, when Israel was first forming, Druze elders went to, I think, Ben Gurion and said, no, we want our young men to be drafted too. This is our country now as well. And so, unlike most, the Druze are drafted in Israel. And they're about 1 in 60 Israelis as a Druze. High percent, 1.6%. You know, it's not trivial. And they've had about 370 or so killed in action, which I think is more than their fair share. Since the founding of Israel has probably been about 13,000 killed in action. So, you know, the Druze, they pay their dues for their citizenship. Khalid is a Druze. He's loyal to Balboa and the legions. He was recruited in Sumer during the war there after his, I think his mother and father and little sister were killed by a bomb. And he helps with the war there in a lot of ways. Then he becomes an assassin, and Fernandez has him offing various members of the family of the Mustafa, the chief terrorist that Carrera is his ultimate opponent, whom he has the sex changed of before crucifying it. Khalid kills a lot of people, but he's really nice. You know, I mean, he's a good guy. He has to kill people. It's his job. But one of them, there's
he's very competent too.
Yeah, well, he gets good training, but yeah, he's got a knack for it besides, and he can do other things too. But he gets in the sewer system and puts about 30 pounds of C4 underneath a manhole in the street, primed for electric detonation. And he waits until the limo bringing the person who's on his hit list to cross it and blows the plate right through his ass. He kills Suzanne Vestplatz. I think he fakes her suicide, as I recall. And if anyone who doesn't think that Suzanne Osthoff, German citizen, didn't conspire in her own kidnapping so she could be ransomed for money to help the enemy in Iraq, they're idiots. She obviously was a conspirator in her own kidnapping, and she was obviously helping the other side. So she obviously deserved to be hunted down and killed. In the book, someone much like her is.
So what about Alex, though? She's kind of turning away from her Tauran Union roots as she is having to go.
She is a Saxon. She's not a Tauran. She doesn't approve of the Tauran.
Right,
yeah.
You got a book.
Thanks, Alana. Daughter, I got another book. Okay. I buy a lot of books.
So, yes.
I don't organize them particularly well, but I do buy them. Yeah, Alex is fairly traditional. She's lesbian, but you know, she doesn't, for example, believe in gay marriage. And there are a surprising number of gays and lesbians who do not, actually. For example, Lee Harris, a brilliant writer, lives around Atlanta, and he's much more concerned with preserving heterosexual marriage and advancing gay marriage. Anyway, Khalid has left his apartment and gone on a little bit of a recon to see what's happening once the Muslim rebellion that he's been providing arms for, or he's been smuggling arms for, in the Tauran Union has kicked off. On the way back, he hears a gang rape. Not just a gang rape, it's an anal gang rape. This is, you know, painful sort of thing. And he, you know, his first instincts are not my business, you know, not my circus, not my monkeys. But at heart, he's not a bad guy, and he just can't walk past and let it go. So he kills the rapists, except for one. He loans Alex his rifle so she can kill him. And then she's got, she can't go home. There's almost certainly, because of who she is and how well known she is, almost certainly some group is trying to get her. So he takes her to his place, gives her his room. He sleeps on the couch, gives her some of his clothes because hers are kind of damaged. And once he discovers, and he reports in what he's got there, and Fernandez says, help her do anything necessary to get the gold, the money that Carrera is demanding for Saxon soldiers to be returned to them, which they desperately need because they've got a rebellion going on. And a couple of more people, I think Fernandez dispatches, I don't know, 4 or 5, I don't remember. But only 2 actually make it there because the country is just in such turmoil. And they find their way up to, Fernandez tracks down where the person they need to find is probably hiding. And they go there to get him out and use him to get the gold released to Balboa. And that's, it's not exactly a rescue mission. It's somewhere between a rescue and a kidnapping.
Yeah, but there's a lot of sort of discussion of the ethics of who you kill and who you don't in such situations that I think is interesting because they're put to the test in that subplot.
Yeah, some, yeah.
Of course, that's generally the way the whole book is. Who are you going to kill?
You should have seen the original version. It's still in this, but in the original version, I went way out of my way to present juxtaposed moral incongruencies. And one sticks in my mind, which does show up in Come and Take Them, I think. We send special forces out in sterile uniforms or sometimes in enemy uniforms. And we don't ever really think that if they get caught, that's a capital offense. And we'd be terribly outraged if they were shot over it. But it's perfectly proper to shoot them if they're doing that, and the only difference is who's doing it, right? Juxtaposed moral incongruency.
What about the technology that's going on here? Are we basically where we are now? There's some kind of badass tanks, for instance, I think.
Which one?
In the book.
No, I know, but they're actually 4, 5.
Yeah, I don't remember the designations. But
Okay, there's Jaguars 1 and 2. 2 being a more product improved one. There's Puma, which is high end, but they don't have that many of those. I think under 100, or no, a little over 100.
Yeah. Well, knowing you, I know you've thought of, because you spent like 14 days trying to figure out the MRE setup.
17.
Okay. So I'm sure you've thought these things out. So what is the technological state of things, and maybe just as tanks and artillery?
Yeah, it's very similar to now. There's a few places where it's not, or a few places where I put a lot of thought into some things. So, for example, if you go back to the 1500s, 1400s, and you look at British, German, and French helmets, and then you jump forward to 1917 and look at British, German, and French helmets, you'll find massive similarities. That British helmet, Brodie helmet, you can find it on paintings of Agincourt in the 15th century. French helmet, the Adrian helmet, same thing. This German coal scuttle thing is echoed back to medieval times in Germany. It seems to me that cultures tend to repeat themselves militarily, to rhyme anyway, and to do certain things the same. So, for example, Carrera's standard regimental light artillery piece is an 85 millimeter that he bought from the Vulcans surplus. Well, yeah, the Russians used here on Earth. Russians used 85 millimeter guns. And they've all. So it's not impossible that they'd repeat it, and even fairly likely that they'd repeat the caliber later on. Same with 122. Some things are different. One of the things I tried to do with it was mix and match high tech, low tech, or medium tech, low tech for a better result. So, for example, well, I'll talk about the Condors a little bit. I was reading about stealth. In fact, I think I was reading Ben Rich's Skunk Works. And he was talking about bats in a Saudi aircraft hangar, circumference of bats in the same shape as an F-117 that had flown into the plane because their sonar they couldn't see the plane with their sonar, so they flew into it and broke their poor little skulls. I started thinking about that. There's the F-117 and the B-2 Spirit are they were very mathematically intense and very carefully manufactured, but randomness could give you much the same thing. And that's where the convex concave chips in the foam for the Condor gliders, that's not something that exists on Earth. I tracked down one of the world's foremost radar gurus, a guy named Jacob Van Zyl, to JPL Pasadena, and I bounced the idea off him, and it's, yeah, he's South African. Yeah, low performance aircraft, yeah, that should work. So it's not exactly the same tech. It is similar tech. The Meg submarines, they kind of came from the same principle, except they actually are kind of carefully figured. And the fairing that is connected to the pressure hull with cones and pyramids should have much the same effect. I did not try to do the math. That's out of my skill set. But the principle of a sonar wave passing through the fairing, being scattered by the cones and pyramids, and then being diffused throughout the ocean enough that it's not readily detectable by the sonar sending unit. That's not Earth tech. Something we could do maybe, but it's not something that we've done. In fact, Ben Rich tried to talk the Navy into a stealth submarine, and the Navy didn't buy off on it.
Another thing that that you do a lot is it seems to me that this probably comes from your years commanding infantry, is come up with more optimal organizations of the units, and you have specific names for them, and it seems like this is what Tom Kratman would have done in the Army if they would have let him frickin' organize things right. Is that just me?
No, it's that's one of those how-to essays.
Yeah,
actually is organization. And I direct anybody who's listening to this to go read the essay on it, on organization and principles of organization. The U.S. Armed Forces, in fact, not just the U.S. Armed Forces, the world's armed forces have one overriding principle of organization: maintain and expand the maximum feasible number of general officers and admirals.
Yeah.
That drives everything else. That's why we've got, for an army, I think we've got as many generals as we had in World War II, or close to as many, for an army that is a 20th the size. That's why and generals produce still more officers. That's the dog.
Uh-huh.
Hello, Stella. She's a good girl.
What's her name?
Stella.
Stella.
Hit the road, doggy girl. Go ahead. Oh, you want to stay there? Lie down. She's a pit bull. She's a really good dog. Loves people, loves cats, does not like other dogs. Now, where the hell was I before?
Well, we were talking about organization, and we use a lot of Roman terms, and so.
Oh well, yeah, that's partly that's just to sound strange. It's not necessary to have done that. They could have been regiments and battalions rather than tercios and cohorts, divisions rather than legions. In some places, though, they're exactly the same. Corps is a corps. and it even looks something like a modern corps. A brigade is not exactly a brigade as we think of it, but you know, it's more than a regiment. It's less than a division. A platoon is a platoon. But yeah, once Carrera makes the decision that they're going to call themselves a legion, because mercenary organizations call themselves legions, the rest just kind of flows. And when he wants to hide from the people he's going, one of the reasons officer corps get ridiculously expanded in alliances is everybody tries to get a little extra rank for its people within an alliance. So a little more rank, a little more pull for that country in that alliance, or that army in that alliance. He wants to subvert that, so he changes all the names of the ranks so that nobody knows who outranks what. And his people can basically ignore the people that they're working for if he wants them to.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're working on now.
I've got a bunch of crap going. Number one is it's partly done. Peter Grant and I signed up with Tony to do. It's really another Terra Nova spinoff, Unto the Last Generation, which is a special forces soldier who sees his entire team. This is on Terra Nova. He sees his entire team killed by lefty lawyers engaging in lawfare, and decides that he has an obligation to. And he was an orphan, so that was the first family he ever had. So he is going to hunt down and kill as many left-wing academics who have been pushing lawfare as he can before he's killed himself. It's Unto the Last Generation because there's some collateral damage when he does that. Anyway, Peter had a heart attack, so he can't work on his part yet, so I'm kind of stymied. I've subcontracted volume 4 of the Countdown series to Justin Watson, who did a story in the Terra Nova anthology. And I haven't seen he's partly done. I haven't seen the draft of what he's done yet, but we chat about it, and he's going in a cool and funny direction with Criminal Enterprise, which is going to be set mostly in Mexico. The novella that I did, Big Boys Don't Cry, I'm working with Vivian Raper, who wrote The Long Dark Good Night, again in the Terra Nova universe. You maybe notice a pattern here. And she's turning Big Boys Don't Cry into a novel. Yeah, we're doing it, but The Court Martial of Wrath of Flowerwood. I like that title myself. Wherein a Bolo-like sentient creature is court-martialed for murder.
Oh, that's a cool idea, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Under the circumstances, I think it's justifiable homicide, and so does everyone else. That's because the Bolo universe is really dystopic. Yeah, it sounds uplifting, but no, we treat Bolos like absolute shit. So the original Big Boys Don't Cry is really an attack on the Boloverse, on the ethos and logic and mythos of it. Not just the fanfic, which is most of it is fanfic, and some of it's very good fanfic. I mean, I find some of those stories moving me, which I guess means there's a little liberal in everyone. But it's definitely an attack. I think the court martial will be pretty good.
Bolo is a giant sentient tank.
Right. These are Ratha. It's much better name than Bolo. Then I just dumped an idea on Lawrence Watson. Not Lawrence Watson. I'm sorry, Lawrence Riley. Just an idea I had that I think would be good for him to do. And he's another one who had a story in the Terra Nova anthology, the drug running story. And that one is, I don't even know if it's suitable for Bane, but it might be. Don't think alternate history, but forgotten history. Something that happened that mattered, but the record is lost. And what that something is a Christian Japanese daimyo upon hearing that Malta is besieged around 1667 or so, sends 303 Christian samurai on a large junk to go to the Mediterranean and help. I think
Sounds pretty cool, but and they didn't get there.
No, they're going to get there, but it'll be lost. You know, they're never going to get to the center of action. I think they'll be all around because Malta wins. They don't need to go help. It's done. They get there.
They take part in it. Well, that's cool. Yeah, yeah.
And then the big one, God, we briefed Tony on it. The last in-person Liberty Con, so that would be last year, right? Yeah. And that's an alternate history series. Remember, you nagged me into doing alternate history. Okay, well, I am.
Well, I think you'd be perfect for it. So yes.
Starting with the Romanov rescue and what flows from the monarchy winning the Russian Civil War. It leads to a lot. It's going to be at least 19 volumes, although we're only under contract for 5. And it leads to some interesting. Some things are not going to change, right? Hitler's still going to rise and take over Germany. It might be harder for him, but it's going to happen. We're still going to end up at war with the Japanese. Russia, since it won't suffer the collectivization and what amounts to mass murder under Stalin, is stronger than Stalin's Russia, Soviet Union was. Because it's a monarchy, various breakaway states may not break away. For example, Estonia was pretty heavily Germanized. And the Germans of Estonia were very prominent in the Russian army before the Great War. And in fact, one of them, German Special Forces in World War II was a group called the Brandenburgers. One of the Brandenburger officers was in fact from a Russian military family from Estonia. Adrian Falcon something or other. So it's, and politics makes strange bedfellows. We're going to be allied with Ho Chi Minh.
Well, that kind of makes a sort of sense, but I like the. All right, so the Tsar never falls, or the Tsar beats the Bolsheviks back, and we get a 20th century with a Russian monarchy in the mix. And that changes things in very interesting ways. Is that the?
I'm going to give a spoiler. The Tsar is not going to survive the experience. One of his daughters.
Okay. Well, that's even better.
I think so. She's very beautiful too. Yeah. And one other thing that, I've had it for a while. Tony's had it for a while, but it's not really something that Bain does. Is a graphic novel that I scripted out, and I've never found the artist for it. And I think Tony still looks into it every now and again.
One day we'll do graphic novels when we can justify. we keep thinking about it.
Yeah, I just
time is not right yet. So.
Yeah, I just sent someone to contact Tony, who's already got funding to do a graphic novel that sounds kind of cool, and is just looking for a distributor, so paper distributor. So that may work out. That would be cool too.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll hear about it. Tony being Tony Weisskopf, my boss, and the publisher at Bain. So, well, anything else on Days of Burning, Days of Wrath that we might want to talk about?
I think it's kind of fun. And I think I finished off all the important threads.
I guess, that is important in that this is I think you can read it as a standalone also, and it's a culminating volume in the series. It's something that if you have been following Carrera, you need to get this book.
Oh, you'll be terribly disappointed for the rest of your life. Yes.
That's right. And a lot of things come out, what's going to happen to Carrera? What's going to happen to his marriage? What about his son? All these,
What's
all
going
these
to happen to his marriage when this dead ringer for his ex-wife shows up?
Yeah, there is that.
Late life.
There's that as well. Is this guy that you've put through this insane experience in his life going to get a happy ending or not? So you don't tell us. I think we know that you're not going to give him a complete happy ending.
I don't do completely happy endings.
Yeah. So, but in a way, it's kind of the Uncompromising Honor, which was sort of an honor-verse, big culminating book of the Carrera verse, in the way that I think of it. It's a book you need to read.
I certainly think they need to read it. Yes.
Well, Tom Kratman, the book is Days of Burning, Days of Wrath by Tom Kratman, and it is now at booksellers everywhere. Tom, thanks so much for talking to us about this novel.
Very happy to do so, and thanks for having me.
That was part 2 of a 2-part interview with Tom Kratman. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization. But the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
Much larger consequences when the ship returns to normal space, and some error is inevitable. The hyperlog, which keeps track of a starship's location in hyper, much the way ancient inertial navigation systems kept track of pre-space submarine submerged positions, has to calibrate after any translation into hyperspace, and that calibration depends on a series of complex comparisons between the vessel's actual energy readings and those projected by a perfect model run over a period of time. There is not enough time for the hyperlog to complete its comparisons in a microjump. Depending upon the jump's duration, the hyperlog may be able to refine its accuracy. It can never achieve anything like complete accuracy. And what creates problems for a single ship tends to create a lot more of them when multiple ships execute a microjump together. Even when a single ship runs the master clock for the jump and every ship initiates its downward translation simultaneously, there's some variance when they actually hit the alpha wall between hyper and normal space. Crossing the wall is akin to encountering atmospheric turbulence in an aircraft, and the wall fluctuates as the result of a complex interaction with any local in-space gravity wells or wormholes. The degree to which that fluctuation can be adjusted for depends upon how well the astrogation computers have analyzed it, and that too is a factor of how long they've had for the analysis. Bearing all those factors in mind, merchant captains generally refuse to put wear on their alpha nodes and hypergenerators for anything less than a half light hour. Their schedules are seldom so time-critical as to make shorter microjumps worth the trouble, the effort, and the uncertainty. Naval astrogators, on the other hand, are specifically trained to make those shorter microjumps, although things can get tricky even for them if the total distance is much less than, say, 3 light minutes. Task Force 1027's microjump was only 23 light seconds, however, and Isadora Hampton had the disruptive influence of the terminus itself to contend with as well. Inevitably, there was going to be a certain sloppiness about it. "Hyper footprints," Thomas Wozniak announced 4.5 minutes after 30 Solarian battlecruisers, 12 light cruisers, and 20 destroyers had vanished from Crew Run 912 sensors. Many footprints, he continued studying the data. The nearest is 700,000 kilometers. The terminus's approaches were a storm of blue lightning flashing against the Stygian dark as 62 starships returned to normal space. Under the circumstances, it was a tight formation, Jane Isotalo thought, as the hyper-footprints flared upon SLNS Foudroyant's master plot. Tight, however, was a relative term, and her two task groups were still scattered over an enormous volume. One division of Nevada's from TG 1027.2's back crew run 615 was over 1 million kilometers from the rest of its squadron. That was the worst dispersal, however, and she smiled fiercely as she saw how tight Isadore Hampton's astrogation had actually been. He had indeed hit very close on the distance. If 4 of her battle cruisers were 1.6 million kilometers from the Mantis, 8 more were barely beyond energy weapon range. Flight time for a Javelin at 700,000 kilometers would be 39 seconds, well within the cycle time on a heavy cruiser's hypergenerator, and the communications lag would be only 2.3 seconds. At that range, all the ECM in the universe wouldn't save the Mantis. She would have preferred energy range, but she'd settle for what she had. "Fire Plan Delta!" she snapped. Delta relied solely on her ship's internal launchers, because there wasn't time to redeploy the extended chains of Huskies and missile pods, which had been drawn in close enough for the battle cruiser's hyper-translation fields to extend around them. Still, the 8 Nevadas, including Foudroyant, closest to the Mantis, belched 224 missiles 2 seconds after she'd given the order. "Not bad astrogation," Commodore Lessem observed as the master plot stabilized. "Those bastards at 038 did especially well." He twitched his head at the closely grouped clump of hyper-footprints off Klaus Fleming's starboard quarter. The Solarians weren't moving relative to his command. A ship translating out of hyper shed over 90% of its velocity in transit energy bleed-off, and they hadn't been moving especially fast through hyper even before they translated back down. But those 8 ships had maintained an extremely tight formation. In fact, he doubted very many Manticoran squadrons could have matched their performance. "Better than I expected, sir," Commander Torrey admitted. "Nobody ever said the Solis weren't competent spacers," Lessem pointed out. "We tend to forget that because—" "Missile launch," Wozniak said. 200 plus inbound from 038163 at 935.3 kps squared. They look like javelins, sir. Time of flight, 39.2 seconds. "Acknowledged," Lessem replied, never looking away from the plot. "As I was saying," he resumed calmly, "we tend to forget that because of how one-sided the actual fighting's been so far. But they're not going to keep their heads inserted into their anal orifices on that front forever, Lester. And when they get them extracted, they're still going to be competent in all those other areas." "Point, sir," Torrey said. Lessem turned his head to smile at him, then glanced at Lieutenant Commander Kivlikon. The astrogator's expression was intense as he watched his console, but there was remarkably little concern on Klaus Fleming's bridge as the missiles accelerated towards her, and then— "Damn!" Admiral Isotalo said as the entire Manticoran squadron disappeared into hyper 14 seconds after her missiles had launched. "Aborting salvo," Rear Admiral Rosiak said, and transmitted the destruct code to the javelins which had been hurtling towards their foes. They self-destructed a second later, and Isotalo grimaced. "I hate it when the other side has a brain," she said. "All due respect, ma'am, it didn't take a whole lot of brain to figure our options," Romulus pointed out. "Like you said, two-step was really our only chance to get into effective range before they bugged out anyway. And I believe you were also the one who said only a drooling idiot would let us get away with it. It was worth trying, but they have to have had their generators ready to cycle the instant they saw us go into hyper." I know, Isotalo snorted. "I guess I'm mostly pissed off at myself for letting them suck me into firing those missiles. Like you say, they had to have known when we'd be turning up, and they could have hypered out 4 damn minutes before we translated back down. The only reason they didn't was because they wanted to sit here long enough to let me fire at them. It was a little cheeky of them, but given the timing, we'd have had to hit end space less than 90,000 kilometers out to catch them with a missile launch. And at that range, we'd have been ripping them apart with energy fire, and damn the missiles." But what were the chances even Isidore could put us that close? She shook her head. No, the manties did that on purpose, and they did it to make the point that they could do it. Beg your pardon, ma'am. Romulus' eyebrows furrowed. We could have fired 10 times that many birds without making a hole in our internal magazines, much less what Quigley's got in the support ships. I think we can assume they're smart enough to figure that out too. So they damned well didn't expect that convincing us to waste missiles chasing them into hyper was going to affect our combat readiness in any way. No, those people only waited because they were thumbing their noses at us before they ran away. Maybe so, Romulus acknowledged after a moment. But that could end up costing them, especially if they really can't fire salvos bigger than the one they already threw at us, ma'am. We're on top of the terminus now, not them.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the remains of the day and the ashes of 10,000 crumpled up hollow men who died with a whimper but make great compost for tomatoes, plus thanks, praise, and gratitude for Tom Kratman, author of Days of Burning, Days of Wrath. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.